But the same people we're going to be negotiating with in good faith are the ones who are trying to push a bill in Olympia that would,
So that's a challenge because it's these are mega organizations, right? And so they have people that are yes that are trying to get legislation passed. The people that we're working with on a daily basis on these things are looking at your code and working on those issues. They're not working on the same thing. I get where you're coming from, and I have that same hesitation. I think you'll find that they're certainly going to be advocating for their position, in your, so that they have a good outcome with your code. But it's much more of a back and forth process that they'll be involved with. So I get where you're coming from, but it's kind of like your national AT&T lawyers versus your local people working here. They're different. So it's a challenge.
and how many carriers are we, I mean, how many are we talking about?
Well, that's a great question. So it's your main ones. So AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint are your main cell phone carriers. There's an entity called Mobility that has been working with, frankly, all of them, mostly with Sprint, and they kind of started all of this. They came in and said, we're going to put up new 75 to 115-foot poles in the middle of your right-of-way. And all the cities absolutely lost it and said, absolutely no. But then there are a lot of other infrastructure companies that are starting to take this up. So the ones that you wouldn't recognize their name, but they're the ones that might have the larger macro sites now, American Tower, some of your backhaul fiber companies are starting to get more involved with it. So they're never going to need more than who's providing cellular service in the area, but if T-Mobile has service in a certain place, that doesn't necessarily mean T-Mobile is knocking on your door looking to put this up. They may utilize somebody else. And so I think that's the last slide that I have. Again, this is the intended to be fairly high level, get you used to what small cell is, the need for it. And I didn't do a lot of, typically I'm a little bit more positive about the need for it. It's going to be great for everybody, particularly in the Northwest when you have a lot of people working at companies that are in tech and people that have, well, millennials and even younger that have high expectations of technology and living in a community that has the services and the resources to make that work, so that all of the fun gadgets that you have can function is important, and being a desirable community for all of that. So I think it's all really positive stuff, and I think that the technology is continually advancing. So it's, in my view, it's going to get better and better. We just need to create a code that keeps them focused on getting better and better, not quick and easy, because we don't want them to just continually try to put up something as fast as they can and take advantage of your right-of-way. But once it's in, everybody's going to have, their smartphones that can do everything that you would want them to do. And nowadays, that's a resource for school, for health, for technology, for cars, and transportation. It's really a valuable tool. So I think there's a lot of utility in getting this right and then allowing them into the city, like they already are, to make sure that everybody gets what they need. Any questions?
I recall something about potential health impacts of 5G going into neighborhoods and waves and affecting people. And maybe it's just like a conspiracy thing. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I would never say, health concerns are totally valid, and I said this at a meeting once before, and Verizon called me afterwards to give me a hard time, but ask them.
Okay.
Have them they provided me with a slide that talks about it. I don't think it's an issue. I think it's fine. It does come up all the time with cell technology, whether it's a big macro tower or whether it's small cell. People get worried about it, and I think that's a fair game to ask and to confirm. But my understanding is that it's fine, but that's for them to prove to you. So.
Well, I would just add to that though, but obviously the industry has a particular perspective on that. So Environmental
Yes.
Working Group does have, I mean, like I use their safe cell phone use recommendations. So I know, I was actually just trying to look that up because I had the same question. So I know, there's issues with the radiation from cell phones, and it's worse the closer to you it is, and it's worse the farther you are from a tower, because it's working harder to connect, or if you're moving like on a train. So I almost wondered, well, if they're closer, maybe that would be better, but I don't know about the devices themselves. So I have the same question, but I would probably look to a variety of sources other than just the industry itself.
I certainly
Just me.
agree with that, yeah. And again, with the change to 5G be different wavelengths, it is operating a little differently, and the technology is working differently. Again, I'm not an engineer, so I don't have those technical answers for you. And the devices continue to change too, but certainly fair game. It does come up with this topic, pretty much no matter what, and sometimes the person that brings it up's got a tinfoil hat on, and sometimes they don't, though. So I think it is it's a fair question to ask.
Any other questions or concerns?
Oh, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, this is more of a chip question, and not exactly related to zoning, planning, but does Burien have a franchise fee?
Yes, we do. And that's a good question and a good lead in to kind of framing why we're getting into this at this point. We received a request from Verizon to enter into a franchise agreement to give them access to all of our rights of way to promulgate their small cell network. And so this has been a learning exercise as we're going along. We're finding out what's in our current code that's not working. Our current code is more focused on private property applications for these facilities. It's not so well equipped to deal with things in the right of way. So we've had to adapt our code to deal with the first few ones that are coming through from Verizon. The city has executed a franchise agreement with Verizon, and they indicated upon the execution of that agreement that they would have up to 6 proposals for small networks coming through in Burien in the next 2 years. We already have 3 of those proposals in-house. We've granted 2 of them, one in Boulevard Park and one in Shorewood. And there's another one that's being processed that's around Lake Burien. So those are the first 3. We are dealing with those 3 on kind of a handshake agreement basis. As we went through the franchise agreement, we identified how we were going to deal with them in the zoning code and how we were going to deal with them in our right-of-way through the Public Works Department. And so at least for Verizon, we have an agreement on how we're going to treat those and how we're going to process those applications. So we are looking to apply that to this process. And we appreciate the help of Daniel and his organization to help us prepare our zoning code. And that's what we'll be considering. You'll be considering as a group in the coming month.
Does that mean that some of the Verizon ones could get installed before we create
Well,
a new
they
code?
couldn't do anything until we had a franchise agreement. So it took us almost 6 months, I think, to work through the franchise agreement. And then we executed that, and they had the right to access the right-of-ways and everything. And so at that point, we had to come up with a permitting process for them. And we knew we didn't have it in our codes, our zoning code or our public works codes, so we have a workaround for that, for this specific instance. we're going to have to go through that same process with each carrier. So AT&T is going to come in, they're going to have to negotiate a franchise agreement. We've already cut the mold for that, so that won't take 6 months. It'll probably take a time period less than that, but it still has to be approved by the city council and everything. And then they will start through the permitting process for their system. And then Sprint would come in, T-Mobile would come in. And we haven't dealt with some of these other providers yet, but it's highly likely that we will at some point. The ones that we have in-house now, they're in the 16 to 23 node range. So what we're doing with it, it's a single land use application that we're doing, a single land use review and an application of our design code. And then we're probably going to do individual public works permits, road standards permits, because they're going to need to have, traffic control plans and, plans specific for that area on how they install it. Even though we've reviewed and approved the land use for 2 of these now, I think just today, Tara went out and tried to do a drive around and see if any of them were installed yet, and they weren't. Not surprised by that, because it's a pretty complicated process, because they're using City Lights facilities, and so they have to work through City Lights infrastructure to get approval to do that. They're working with the city, and so it takes a while to get these things implemented. So that's good for us in that it gives us time to kind of refine our plans and change our zoning code and everything so that we're ready for this wave. But that does inject some need to hurry on this, because we want to have things in place when the big push comes for us.
So in the areas that Verizon already has negotiated an agreement, is that exclusive to them in that geography and that right of
Well,
way?
the franchise agreements are citywide. So they now have citywide rights for our right of way. And they're going to come in on an individual basis, an individual network basis, for their proposals to get permits. But they have already obtained the right to be anywhere within the road system for the city of Burien.
Non-exclusive.
Non-exclusive.
So AT&T could go in and
Oh, absolutely.
Cloud Park
Yeah,
too.
if that was a question, yes. We expect there'll be a series of people coming in. And so to answer an earlier question, probably how it's going to work is first in, first out. The Verizon is going to have the lead here, and they're probably going to put their system, and the choices are going to be more limited for the next carrier that comes in and for the third carrier and fourth carrier.
Anything else, Kate? Okay, thank you.
I did want to mention, the memo that was provided to you in your packet indicated that we would come back at the next meeting with draft code language. And at this point, we're anticipating there's been a delay with, we have some questions that we need to work through with our Public Works Department. And so we're anticipating that we'll probably need to push that meeting out to the following Planning Commission meeting, which would be July 25th. We'll come back to you with draft code language. We are wanting to have the wireless providers review the code and provide us with some initial comments prior to the Planning Commission meeting. So if there are any big red flags, those are things we can talk about or highlight for you as well at the first meeting.
Have other local jurisdictions around here, are they further along in the process? Is there things we can learn from them?
Yes, so we have 3 attorneys that primarily work on this. Scott Snyder is at another meeting tonight, working code forward, and I'll be going to that city in 2 weeks to move it forward. I just finished up Issaquah, Ilana did Redmond. So yeah, there are a lot of cities that we are working with. that are anywhere from completed to just barely getting started. So we have a lot that we can draw upon, and then obviously your staff resources as well.